Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for February 24th, 2011, the 19th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up on tonight's program, the Senate passes its version of the FY 2011 amended budget. Changes will likely send the bill to conference committee. The bill that makes changes to the Hope Scholarship, a pre-K program, passes the House Appropriations Committee today. A controversial measure allowing billboard companies to clear roadside trees on state right-of-way passes the House. We continue our leadership series tonight. Insurance Commissioner Ralph Hudgens will join us to talk about plugging the Oxidine option. And for some end-of-the-week analysis, we'll be joined by Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report and Bill Crane, political analyst with CSI Crane. All that and more is coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. But first, the Senate adopts its amended budget for the current fiscal year. For that story, let's go live to the Capitol, where Mwandi Lawson is standing by. Good evening, Mwandi.
Well, good evening, Scott. And the Senate did indeed pass House Bill 77. That's the amended FY 2011 budget that was passed this afternoon. By a vote of 46-4, the Senate agreed to the $18.5 billion spending plan to take the state through June of this year. Changes made by the Senate Appropriations Committee will send that measure to a House Senate Conference Committee. Also clearing another hurdle, House Bill 235, approved by the House Appropriations Committee this morning. That plan to revise how the Hope Scholarship is awarded as well as how pre-K instruction is delivered was passed out of a subcommittee in less than 10 minutes. About 30 minutes later, the full Appropriations Committee heard the bill, leaving Representative Matt Dollar to question why the measure is moving so quickly.
Meetings have been taking place over the last, for the House side, we've been meeting since last August. Since the new governor, since Governor Deal was elected, he immediately began a look at this, and over the past number of weeks, these have been discussed. I know in our caucus and others, these things have been brought up on many occasions. I do not feel like this is in any way a rush through, because this is something that has been the most dominant conversation besides a couple of other bills that I know their sponsors are very proud of. This is one of the premier legislation pieces that we knew going into this session that was going to take place.
With crossover day still 2 weeks away, I'm just a little curious as to why we'll be voting it out of committee today, having seen it less than 48 hours.
As you so aptly put a few minutes ago, I'm the author and the sponsor of this bill, and I work at the pleasure of the committee process, and the committee process says we're voting that we're bringing it to this committee today. I appreciate your concern, but I work within the committee process as well.
The House Appropriations Committee passed the Hope measure by a vote of 60-2 and sent it to the House Rules Committee. The House also approved an oft-debated measure allowing billboard companies to clear-cut trees that block their signs. Those who favor House Bill 179 argue that it creates jobs and does not cost the state money.
The environmental argument just does not make any sense. If we clear-cut every billboard in the state of Georgia, it would only affect in the neighborhood of 2,300 acres, less than 0.01% of the timberland in Georgia.
And if you say that it's a bailout or it's a subsidy, then you ain't read the bill and you ain't read the amendment. There's more money going into this program if this bill passes than is currently there today. And with the amendment that's being offered, the billboard industry is saying we'll pay for all the cost.
Many representatives, of course, aren't buying those claims, and lengthy debate preceded the bill's passage.
But wait, say the bill's proponents. It's about jobs. It's all about jobs. The economy is in rough shape, and this bill is about jobs. On your desks earlier in the session, we even got a nifty little plastic billboard implying that billboards create large numbers of jobs in each of our districts. But that argument is hogwash, intended to hook a government subsidy, a giveaway, to the difficult circumstances of the day. I encourage you not to buy what you are being sold, because I certainly do not see how the height of a billboard sign and the government giveaway that is proposed to address that narrow issue has any effect on a single one of the 6,200 jobs that's on this little plastic billboard.
HB 179 did clear the House with an amendment by a vote of 98-69. It moves to the Senate. Approval also today of Senate Resolution 20, the Taxpayer Protection Amendment of 2011, sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Chip Rogers.
It simply says that the state should not spend any more money in addition to population plus inflation increases, and that if excess revenue comes into the state beyond that spending limit, then that money should go to do two things, and that is, number one, go into our rainy day fund up until the point that the rainy day fund is at 15%, or it should go to pay off state debt. Now, historically, if you look back the last 20 years, between 1989 and 2008, if we had practiced this particular process, or if this had actually been in place, we would have $2.5 billion additional dollars in the shortfall reserve. And as you heard, Senator Hill do a great job here on the budget. Correction, Senator from the 4th do a great job on the budget. You will know that that $2.5 billion would have been nice to have in the bank.
Senator Nan Orrock compared that measure to a bill adopted by the Colorado legislature, which she said had disastrous impact on funding for transportation, education, and other infrastructure.
It's a great campaign slogan. It promotes a view that government's bad. You've got to tie the hands of these legislators that you elected, and they cannot be trusted with money. And we need to ratchet down any attempt for government to fund things, because after all, it's your money, and you ought to keep it in your pocket. Now, y'all are familiar with that slogan. A lot of you probably may have said it during a campaign.
Senator Rogers says there's no danger to future budgets because SR 20 allows the cap to be lifted by a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. That measure passed the Senate by a vote of 42-7. It now moves to the House. The House Insurance Committee today adopted a bill aimed at cracking down on the actions of former Insurance Commissioner John Oxendine, who granted himself several licenses without going through the education or testing requirements. Current Insurance Commissioner Ralph Hudgens presented HB 347 to the committee, which gave the bill a do-pass recommendation. More on that in our leadership segment later in the show. Unlock the doors to real communities was the theme of the 13th annual Disability Day at the Capitol, drawing over 2,000 advocates and some good news about how a settlement with the U.S. Department of Justice will benefit disabled Georgians.
There's money in the budget to meet the requirements of the Department of Justice settlement agreement. It's a good bit of money, so we're really happy about that. That's going to provide family support for 400 families in the rest of this year, and another 400 families next year. That's the first time we've had family support in the budget in a long time, so that's really good news.
The 2012 budget also includes waivers for 100 disabled people who are at risk of institutionalization. Governor Nathan Deal was on hand this morning as well to pledge his support to the community.
As governor, I will work to implement the recent settlement with the United States Department of Justice. I believe that the action plan that is called for can help us serve the disability community, particularly in the following areas. Increased community crisis services, which will enable us to serve individuals in a mental health crisis without admitting them to a state hospital. Creating at least 1,000 Medicaid waivers to transition individuals with developmental disabilities from state hospitals to community settings. Increasing crisis, respite, family, and housing support services to serve individuals with developmental disabilities in community settings. My vision for people with disabilities begins with the fundamental conviction that we should strive to provide every man and woman with greater access to real homes, real communities, real learning experiences, and real careers. As a state, we must provide a stronger, more effective community-based infrastructure to meet the individual needs of people with disabilities.
And those disability advocates also say they look forward to having a hearing on a bill that would create a greater ability for the disabled persons to actually appeal their Medicaid claims. More on that next week. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Wandi Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Wandi, this is so important to those families. I had a follow-up question. You said the 2012 budget includes money to keep 100 disabled people out of institutions. How close does that come to bring the state to meeting the needs of everyone who's on the waiting list?
You know, I was talking to Pat Noby this morning. She's from the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. She said that the number of people actually on that waiting list is closer to 5,700, and that the council actually believes that 3 times that number of people actually need the services, and they either haven't applied or maybe they've given up after being on the waiting list for a number of years.
Wow, that's so important to so many people. Well, the pace is picking up. Thanks for a great reporting, Wandy.
All right, thanks, Scott.
Have a good night. Yesterday afternoon, Insurance Commissioner Ralph Hudgens joined me here in the studio, and I began our leadership interview by asking the commissioner about the Oxidine licensing issue and if he wants to push for legislation to address that. Here's his answer.
I am, and I was introduced yesterday morning at a breakfast where I spoke, and they told me that, or they told the audience that I regulated 137,000 licensed insurance agents in the state of Georgia. And when I stood up, I said, yeah, and 136,999 took a test to get their license. But one did not, and we have a bill that was dropped today. It's going to be heard in committee tomorrow afternoon that addresses this. It said no insurance commissioner can grant himself a license without having taken and passed the test. And so it won't happen again.
So that will make its way through the legislature.
It will. Because we thought about, I could implement a rule for that, but then any commissioner that followed me in that office can negate that rule and remove it. And so we thought the strongest thing we could do would be to have the legislature address it. So this was introduced in the House today. It was dropped by Representative Bill Hembry, and he had several co-sponsors, and it's in committee meeting tomorrow afternoon, and I plan to go to the committee meeting and testify that I support this fully, and I think it will fly through the House, and I think it'll go to the Senate. I've talked to many of the Senate members, and they're in full agreement with it. The Lieutenant Governor's already weighed in on the subject and thought that this was the inappropriate activity on the previous commissioner's part.
Another issue it sounds like you're going to be very active is fighting fraud, especially
Absolutely.
Insurance fraud. Bring us up to date on what you're going to do there.
Well, we have hired, well, let me back up and say that one of the biggest problems with insurance fraud is that district attorneys are not willing to address this because they view it as a victimless crime. They view it that the insurance companies have a lot of money and that nobody's hurt, and they've got murders and rapes and armed robberies that they need to prosecute. And so to answer this, we've hired an ex-district attorney who has a personal relationship with the various district attorneys around the state. So he can prioritize a case, he can structure that case in a way that he can put it together where all he has to do is hand it to that district attorney and say, this is ready to go to trial. And the reason we're doing that, Scott, is because fraud is one of the most expensive line items on an insurance company's profit and loss statement. It costs the insurance companies money, but that's really false when you say that. It costs you and me money.
They pass it on.
Because they pass it on.
You're also going after some unscrupulous people in the construction industry, too.
Right, on the roofing. There's a bill that's being modeled after legislation that was introduced in Minnesota. What's happening is that these unscrupulous roofing contractors, they will actually go and I've heard they'll take quarters and take a hammer and pound that quarter into the shingle and, around and say this is hail damage, or they will damage the roof in such a way that, and then they'll guarantee this homeowner that they'll get a free roof and that they will even pay their deductible for them. And it's fraud, it's unscrupulous, and we have got a piece of legislation that's modeled after the Minnesota bill that is going to be introduced, and I don't have a number on it, and we don't even really have a sponsor, but we will find one very quickly.
You're in an interesting position as insurance commissioner. The folks want you to keep rates low.
Right.
Insurance companies want a good environment to do business. If you bring more insurance companies in, they'll compete, maybe keeping rates low. How do you balance those two things, and how do you use your office to do that?
Well, I can use my office to by making Georgia one of the best places to do the business of insurance. And one of the biggest impediments that I heard during the 20 months that I ran for this office was that Georgia was extremely hard place to get a new product registered or to get a rate increase or decrease, either one, approved. And so we have, this is called speed to market. The insurance company want to be able to see a need in the market, and they want to be able to react to it. But if you've got the impediment of a government agency that won't give them the authority to go ahead and the license to do this, then they lose their opportunity. And my viewpoint is that free enterprise, capitalism, whatever you want to call it, works. And the more we can increase the competition between the insurance companies to bid for your business, the better value you're going to get. And so I want to make Georgia as attractive to an insurance company as I possibly can to come in here and to compete for your business to do.
Commissioner, you've hit the ground running. It's great visiting with you. Hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you very much. Enjoy it.
We spoke on Wednesday afternoon. Insurance Commissioner Ralph Hudgens formerly served in the state Senate. After this short break, I'll be joined on set by Tom Crawford and Bill Crane for some in-depth analysis on this week under the Gold Dome, so stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. It's the end of another legislative week, which means it's time for commentary and analysis. This week under the Gold Dome has seen Governor Nathan Deal's HOPE bill introduced, passed subcommittee, and this morning passed the full House Appropriations Committee, passage of the 2011 amended budget in the Senate. A commission established to look into state funding of K-12 education, introduction of Insurance Commissioner Hudgens' insurance licensing bill, and passage by the House of that bill allowing billboard companies to clear trees along roadways. All in all, a pretty busy week. And here to help make some sense out of these issues and more is Tom Crawford. He's editor of the Georgia Report. Tom usually joins us via recording, but he's live with us tonight. And Bill Crane, political analyst with CSI Crane. Bill often joins us at the end of the week. Thank you both for being here.
Glad to be here, Scott.
The pace is beginning to pick up a little bit.
Yeah, they're actually voting on things and passing legislation, at least from one chamber to the other.
Mm-hmm. Have you detected frustration down there, like some of the tape we had earlier tonight? Things are moving a little too slow.
Well, that was the way it was early in the session. People this week are starting to say, Scott, that it's beginning to feel like a real session because things are moving. Bills are coming out of committee, budgets are getting approved, things are finally happening, and it's been really since January 10th that's happening.
We're well over halfway and 2 weeks away from the crossover day, and you would normally have probably 30 or 40 bills in each hopper at this point, and you don't.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some specifics. The HOPE bill. The HOPE bill, backed by Governor Deal as well as Democrats and Republicans in the Assembly, appears to be fast-tracked. Will we see that come to a vote on the floor of the House soon?
I think it'll come up next week probably. The bill was introduced just 2 days ago. It's already out of committee, which is lightning fast speed. So that's an indication that the governor wants them to go ahead and move on it. And I think we'll see that next week, and it'll go over to the Senate and I think be acted on just as quickly there.
Mm-hmm. Bill, do you think it's moving?
I think it's moving, but I think there's a lot of expressed concern by particularly students who are in school now who didn't think they were going to be impacted, who are looking at next fall. The Board of Regents had indicated after this year's 16% tuition hike that there's a healthy tuition hike coming next year. So the combination of tuition hikes and a cut of 10% at least before you even start talking about the book allowance has a lot of students, i.e. their parents and family, scared, and those phones are ringing. So I think the brakes might be applied a little bit on some of that package on the Senate side.
Are people, though, saying that 90% of something's better than 100% of nothing? I mean,
are they
satisfied
yeah.
with this?
I don't know that they're satisfied, but certainly the people that weren't zeroed out. I mean, the folks who lost the remedial cuts, they're angry. Anybody who loses anything is not going to be happy. But I think that the surprise has been that there was an expectation that the existing scholars in Hope and pre-K would be grandfathered in, and whatever change would take place would next year on new recipients of the funds as opposed to existing scholars. And of course, that's not the case in the proposed legislation. That may be one of the amendments.
And Tom, I mean, if the lottery starts churning out more bucks, they go back and change it, right? Is that one of the mechanisms inside this bill?
Theoretically, if the lottery produces more money, yeah. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think anybody's really expecting that to happen either. But sure, it's possible. It's possible. But I think one reason you're seeing this move as quickly as it is for the reason that Bill just alluded to. You want to get it through there before opposition really has time to
Cauterize
develop.
the wound and get it on through.
Before people have time to get really mad and start calling up their legislators.
Galvanize.
One more thing, a lot of people have loved the pre-K program in Georgia. And there's new studies that are coming out, in fact, next week, that actually quantify how you spend money when these kids are 4 years old, how it pays off when they're 18.
And I'll disclose, I got a kid going into pre-K. It's off the charts on what it does. And cutting 2.5 hours out of that day, there's already data in some other states that the shorter the day, the less the benefit.
But they'll add 5,000 more kids to the 84,000 that go now by doing that, right? More or less?
Yeah, but again, as it cuts so much for the people who are already in it, you're going to, I think, again, have some bruised feelings.
There's also a feeling that the disproportionate recipient of pre-K now are families and households with incomes less than $40,000 a year, and they'll be the first impacted by this.
Okay, well, we'll watch how that moves. Both the House and Senate have passed versions of the FY 2011 amended budget. That's the mid-year budget. How far apart are they? And will this conference committee have serious discussions or disagreements on this?
I don't think it'll be serious. They're very close together anyway, and the feeling on both the House and the Senate side is, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. We agree on most of it anyway. It's the budget for fiscal year 2012 that's going to be the really hard one to to balance, because they got $1 billion hole there, and the feeling
it's $18 billion. That was a surprise to me, is that the next budget is $18 billion when the last one was $17.8 billion. So even without the federal stimulus money, the budget is up with all these cuts, $200 million.
Did they find 2 or 3 more points in revenue? They had a new forecast, right?
We're doing better on revenue, and they're obviously factoring that in. But if you look at kind of the hardest cost, each payroll day for state government is $100 million. So even with the cuts that the governor announced in both frozen positions they weren't going to fill and layoffs and furloughs, we're still going to be spending more for all those people who say the sky is falling.
Let's talk about another big bucket issue where a lot of money goes, K through 12 education and paying for it. Legislation passed earlier this week creating a study committee to look into funding for K through 12 education. Will we see an increase in state funds for quality basic education?
I don't think it'll mean an increase. What it will mean is that the formula will be more realistic. This is a formula that they adopted in the mid-'80s. It hasn't really been revised or updated since then, and there's a general agreement among education experts. We do need to revise that. So what you will have is money that's allocated more fairly, more equitably, more logically. There won't necessarily be more money, but at least it'll make more sense in where it goes.
And the last legislative session, Speaker Ralston in the House, followed by the Senate, and then Governor Perdue, gave a little bit more flexibility on how those dollars are spent when they're handed down. Governor Deal has indicated, with a wife as a school teacher, he wants to give more local flexibility to the superintendents and the boards of education. So there'll be fewer strings attached as to where those dollars have to be allocated. And things like new math are being revisited by the school superintendent.
Gut punch issues now. Let's talk about things that people, the little things that make people, sweat, make people scream, make people laugh. The billboard bill passed the House today. Now, that's pretty important. This thing has always derailed in the House before, hasn't it? Cutting trees in front of billboards.
You tend to get the green community and the tree-saving community come forward and talk about that if you cut down limbs, you end up denuding forests, et cetera. There was a point made earlier in the show that Georgia is still about 70% timber. And even if you look at all 6,200 billboards and you cut everything around it in a circle, you're still talking about a few thousand acres. So it's a small amount of forestation. There are jobs and there are industries tied, including the farmers whose property taxes are paid by those billboards. They don't own those billboards, but the billboard owners pay them if you can see the billboard. So there is an economic argument to be made, but also I'm sure Tom will make that it's a subsidy argument. And in this time, giving that industry basically a state tax cut is probably not the easiest thing to do.
Well, that was one of the arguments you heard today, was that you're basically giving a freebie to the billboard industry. Is it worth it if it's going to create more jobs? Maybe so, but if all you're doing is giving a financial benefit to somebody, what good does it do? That was a point of contention among a lot of the House people today during the debate.
Do you think we'll see a time where they'll come back and say, okay, you can cut the trees in front of billboards, but we're going to have less billboards now?
I don't think you're going to see less billboards in Georgia. And if you look at the interstate corridors where much of this revenue comes from, the boards just get bigger and higher. And I think you're going to see more of that over time. But they're very expensive to erect, so you won't see that until the economy comes back.
The Sunday Land Journal-Constitution is going to run a piece this week that talks about the huge amount of pressure coming to bear now on the Sunday package alcohol sales issue. And Tom, this has become a, you call it a scorecard issue for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce?
It is a scorecard issue for the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. They're going to note how people vote on this and make an issue of it in the elections next year. The Senate, I think, thought that they had put this issue to rest last week when they said, well, we don't have the votes for it, so we're not going to bring it up. But Roger Williams over on the House side has indicated it's still alive there. They're still going to keep moving their version of the Sunday sales bill. That keeps pressure on the Senate. So does the scorecard from the Georgia Chamber, because the Georgia Chamber, I think, clearly wants this. So do the Georgia convenience store folks. So all of those little points of pressure, it becomes almost like Chinese water torture. And we may see this issue popping back up before the end of the session, I think.
What do you think, Bill?
I think that you're going to see the pressure, and I also think it's kind of interesting that the Georgia Chamber, that tends to be pretty meek and in the background, has strapped a pair on for this issue. And if the Senate leadership does the same thing, we may see it pass.
Okay. Taking the teeth out of immigration legislation. That has certainly been a hot button issue. And Representative Matt Ramsey, I did not hear what he did to HB 87 or what he will do to tone it down a little bit. But Jack Murphy is backing down on the on how big a business has to be subjected to E-Verify. Is this going to be the trend that's going to continue? All this is going to be watered down?
Not just in Georgia. There's a lot of scrutiny of the accuracy of E-Verify. The concept of E-Verify is a good one, but in practice, when you check that database, because it's only as good as the data that's put in testimony earlier this week, 50 to 80% error rates. And that's not exactly to bet the farm on or to be locking people up over. And there are also I-9 audits that the federal government's doing now to go back in and look at paperwork. If you have filled out your I-9 form when you were hired by WSB and Cox 25 years ago, whether that paperwork is on file. So there's kind of a double-edged sword, federal and state now, looking at whether your employees are actually U.S. citizens.
Well, and what we've seen here, Scott, is a continuing pushback by business groups like the Georgia Agribusiness Council, the Georgia Chamber, the Georgia Association of Contractors, who are saying, wait a minute, you're going to cause a real hardship if you start imposing all of these regulations on us, like blanket E-Verify. So I think the legislators are reacting to that and backing away just a little bit.
All right, unfair, but just the reality of the clock. 15 seconds each. Do you think the federal government will shut down next week, or will they come up with a deal that makes the Tea Party freshmen happy, cutting enough out of it?
30-day deal.
That was
probably
50 seconds.
I was being generous to Tom.
No.
Go, Tom, go.
Bill's probably got the right handle on that. It's hard for me to think they would shut it down completely.
All right. What are you looking for in the next week, other than that, maybe? Something big coming?
Somebody's going to have to cave. That I don't see a big shutdown coming. So one of those sides is going to cave in the next week to 2 weeks. I just don't know who.
Yeah.
People hate government spending. They love government services. But the one thing it doesn't stop is federal withholding. No. Keep that in mind. It's great to see both of you. Thanks for being here. Please come back. We love doing this. We sure do. One final note, GPB Radio, Susanna Capelouto covered her final legislative day today. To note her almost 2 decades of service in the Capitol Press Corps, House Speaker David Ralston even recognized her from the rostrum this morning. We'd all like to join the Speaker giving our best wishes to our colleague Susanna. Good luck at CNN. You will be missed. General Assembly isn't in session tomorrow or Monday, so Primetime Lawmakers will not be seen at 7, but please tune in for Primetime Politics instead. Tomorrow's program features a spirited discussion on immigration reform. That's tomorrow night at 7 on GPB. When Primetime Lawmakers returns on Monday, we'll bring you another installment in our leadership interview series. House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams is scheduled, plus in-depth analysis on important legislative issues and the latest Capitol news. Primetime Lawmakers returns Monday, February 28th at 7 p.m. If you'd like to see a repeat of this broadcast, Primetime Lawmakers can be seen at 5:30 tomorrow morning here on GPB. Coming up next, Georgia Outdoors, Crashing Waters. Join Sharon Collins as she explores the waterfalls in North Georgia. Stay tuned for that. That's our broadcast for the 19th Legislative Day of the 2011 session. Thanks to our guests for joining us tonight. For Wandy Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Have a great night.
This is a GPB original production.